Welcome to Your Money Guides, brought to you by Interface Financial Planning. A guide to wealth protection. Look after the downside, and the upside will take care of itself. The very best money managers and investors have an obsession and focus on preservation and exceptional risk management of their positions, a trait which works right across the financial spectrum. How exactly can you go about managing your wealth and your money to reduce risks, to protect against running out of funds, to protect you from having an experience which rips your finances to pieces, how to protect your wealth through the rest of your life, and how to protect your family bloodline interests? The aim here is to help you work out what major risks are, and from there, how to put in place plans to protect yourself. In this guide, I will look at how to protect family against death or critical illness, and how to keep your pension value intact. I will also examine how to protect wealth against divorce in the family, and how to protect monies in retirement, and also how to pay for care fees, and how to protect your income and savings against inflation and tax rises. I will also look at how families and individuals can benefit from the use of trusts, and I will explore how and why such a simple mechanism and solution to so many threats is perceived as complex when the reality is different. Every section of this guide is dedicated to providing ideas and information to help you protect your wealth and assets. Let's start with protecting your family with life cover and critical illness cover. Anyone looking to protect their family wealth should look closely at how they can put in place life assurance to ensure that money is paid to beneficiaries on their death. Life assurance costs are normally fairly modest and arranging a life policy relatively easy. There are two areas of life assurance planning which are particularly linked to family protection: paying off loans and covering taxes, especially inheritance tax. Many families in this current age have high debts, and many of those same families afford the cost of the debt through one wage earner. If that wage earner dies and their income ceases, the loans or debts can then become unaffordable for the beneficiaries or dependents, devastating the family that remains. So putting in place life assurance to pay off debts is usually a sound position. Creating a lump sum on death over and above the debt may well be crucial to keep a decent level of income available for the family. For those who have very large estates, wealth measured in hundreds of thousands or more, inheritance tax or IHT is a factor. There are many ways IHT can be alleviated, including through the use of trusts. However, life assurance can be used as an alternative to pay the expected IHT bill. There is also the fact that many estates have property as the main asset. In this respect, life assurance cover can be useful to save the property from having to be sold to pay the tax. Separate to life cover, critical illness cover is a valuable part of wealth protection. Just as debts may cause problems on death, especially if income comes from one main source, so a critical illness can prove destructive to wealth. The possibility an individual suffering a critical illness is many times higher than dying prior to retirement. This may seem an obvious point, but very few people in proportion have critical illness protection despite its greater likelihood. The critical illness definition is important. At the top level, critical illness policies cover such things as cancer, heart disease including heart attacks, strokes, and diseases such as MS and motor neuron disease. The definitions can vary, although they have become more streamlined in recent years. A critical illness plan can be put in place so that a lump sum pays out should an individual suffer one of the critical illnesses covered. This could be used to pay off debt, to cover the loss of income, or to provide for medical treatment to help the individual recover, all things that may keep wealth preserved. So how can trusts improve the position with life policies? Any policy which pays out a lump sum may present a problem. Where is the money paid? What is the tax treatment? Many people who wisely protect themselves against an untimely death or critical illness may do so neglecting to consider potential consequences. In this day and age of high divorce rates amongst families, unmarried couples and second mortgages, the simple question of where a lump sum eventually ends up may be difficult to answer. If a lump sum is paid, then there may be a question of whether it will be taxed. To some extent, a well-written will could deal with some of this. However, to properly protect the situation, there is no better solution than a trust. Adding a trust to a life assurance policy allows the individual to provide a clear direction on where and how and when the money is paid out. A trust can also be used to take a lump sum away from any tax liability. There is no value in paying for a policy if it pays out and then 40% is lost to the taxman. There may as well have been a smaller sum paid out if this was the case. If a policy is written under a trust, it will mean it can pay out without any reference to probate. This could mean two things. Firstly, it can speed up the payout of the life assurance cover, and secondly, it could save costs. Trusts should always be used alongside life policies for these reasons. Yet most policies are set up without a trust in place. Let's now take a look at inflation and wealth destruction. Inflation is the hidden but very real threat to many savers and investors. If you have money invested, then one of the most important elements is to factor in the real rate of return you are getting. One of the cornerstones of financial planning is to gain an understanding of the effects of compounding. What may look like a fairly benign number can be very dangerous when compounded. An inflation rate of say 3% may not seem much in any one year, but rolled over 10 years it's a very significant figure. 3% inflation year on year totals 34.5% after 10 years, which would have an effect of reducing the value of investment by 1/3 over this period. Many investors would consider a loss of 1/3 unacceptable if it was a straight line loss, but ignore it in terms of inflation. At the moment, inflation has generally been higher on average than a typical cash return. Therefore, those savers and investors who hold cash are losing value because of this. Now, if we look at losses, the loss of capital can be hard to make up. For example, a 30% loss requires a 43% recovery. Most professional investors tend to have one thing in common. They look to minimize their downside. There is a position which stretches beyond mainstream investing. Professional traders will focus on avoiding losses, just as professional poker players will be adept at getting away from poor hands. In terms of investing, the principle is quite easy to demonstrate. If you place money into an investment, for example £20,000, and it falls by 30%, it becomes worth £14,000. From that point on, to get back to its starting value, the investment needs to grow by £6,000. This is £6,000 of the £14,000. That works out at 43%. This is a very real issue for investors, particularly emphasised through 2008 and 2009 when many markets tumbled. History shows this occurs time and time again across all asset areas. There is a great deal written about buy and hold and you cannot time the market. Many investors hold these and similar sayings upmost in their thoughts. However, whatever strategy is pursued in managing wealth, the focus is placed on managing the downside position has to be central. It should be the priority if you are seeking to protect your wealth. Now let's look at investment protection. There are many ways that a downside can be protected. These vary from holding cash, but the problem of inflation erosion exists. There is also using structured methods and using highly diversified asset allocation portfolios. The exact method will be determined by your risk position and your tolerance to risk. A paradox of investing is not to get too heavily focused on the downside to the point where no upside is left. For example, holding 100% cash for the long term is quite likely to protect the downside, certainly in nominal terms, but has little upside potential. The way to deal with this, and to handle this paradox, is to start from the basis of risk assessment. Historically, the convention was to assess risk based on your attitude to risk. This is a mistake. The importance of managing the downside should be built around your tolerance to risk. Once a tolerance to risk has been assessed, then the downside protection can be fully considered and suitable investment products and plans put in place. There are many products which build in a floor to the downside, and these may well be suitable. Alternatively, it may be the case that a position can be protected through a diversified asset allocation process. So how do we manage risk? There is a considerable amount of confusion around and the misuse of the word risk. Any financial plan will have an element of risk attached, which means things may not work out as expected. In investment terms, risk is most often used to describe the potential for loss. How likely is it that the investment you make will lose money? The problem for advisors and investors is that the risk is hard to quantify and is easily misjudged either up or down. Sometimes investors take on an investment not realising how risky it is, i.e. how likely it is that they will lose money or how much they might lose. Or they don't invest in something which would otherwise be good to invest into because they think it's too risky and overstate the risk element. It's a central requirement of any strategy which aims to protect wealth that a proper regard to risk is made. There are two key elements to this: risk management and due diligence. If you are aiming to protect your wealth, then you should make sure that whatever investment you make, and generally this applies to all financial transactions, should be subject to an assessment which involves measuring the risk and which contains a due diligence exercise. Too many problem investments could have been avoided by the prudent investor simply by undertaking these two steps: risk management and due diligence. Have you done this with each and every one of your financial holdings? I'll now take a look at retirement funds and pre-retirement issues around death. The most consistent element of government policy is that it has been inconsistent. The biggest outcome from this haphazard approach to pensions and the constant legislation shifts is that there are any number of different types of pension schemes floating around and held by investors. Personal pensions, stakeholder schemes, Section 32 buyouts, protected rights, final salary schemes, auto-enrolment, and many more besides make up the various pension types that any individual may hold, and many may hold more than one type. It's a confusing picture because different schemes or plans may have different rules applying. Not enough attention is given to the type of pension you may have and its structure. This is important because the situation and treatment of the pension on death before retirement could be very different depending on the type of scheme. There are three ways that this may be important to you. Firstly, do you know who the residual pension value will be paid to should you die before you retire? This is especially important for single or married people, for those who have been divorced, and also for those who have children with different mothers or fathers. It's also important for those who may be facing bankruptcy, and for anyone with specific requirements for their money to be dealt with in a particular way upon their death. Secondly, do you know how your pension will be paid out? Will your beneficiaries receive a lump sum, a monthly payment, or a combination of both, or possibly nothing at all? And if so, how does this relate to the value at the date of death? And lastly, do you know how the payout will be taxed? Will inheritance tax be applied? And will your beneficiaries pay income tax on the benefit that they receive? It's simple to deal with all of this. Get the position reviewed, and if there is something you are not happy with, it's highly likely that you can amend the position exactly to your requirement with the use of simple trust forms or nomination forms. The use of such forms in these cases means that you can direct what you want to happen within the confines of the relevant legislation. The investment strategy you adopt within your pension is key to the twin objectives you are likely to have: to grow your pension and to protect it. These are often seen as separate requirements and in many cases conflicting requirements. So is it possible, however, that they are complementary? Too often, investment planning is oversimplified by many commentators. For example, the trade-off between risk and reward. To get better rewards, you have to take more risk is the age-old and assumed underpin to most investment considerations. There are many investment experts who believe this is fundamentally wrong. Yes, often high-flying investments in the sense that they aim for high double-digit year-on-year percentage returns are racier. Think commodities and emerging markets, for example. Yet these same investments are subject to long down periods or sudden downturns of some magnitude. If you review the long term, then over time it is more often than not the steady yet less racy investments that win the day. Investors and their advisors rarely time the fluctuating price of volatile high-risk investments, leaving them vulnerable to downturns. And the lesson from this? Relatively reliable but unspectacular holdings generally do the trick and often end up producing higher returns. They are less volatile as well, suggesting lower risk. Pensions are an ideal vehicle to build a balanced asset allocation investment portfolio, where risk is controlled but returns are still achievable. There is no reason to sacrifice risk for reward or reward for risk. So what about post-retirement issues? Pensions have special rules applying to them and specific tax treatments, and these vary depending on status and whether the pension is pre or post-retirement. The driver for most people after retirement is to balance a number of different factors. Firstly, to preserve their wealth, then to have a retirement income, and also ensure tax efficiency. There may also be the requirement for dependents to be looked after once they die. As I mentioned in the earlier section on how to invest within a pension, there is a misconception about these requirements. They do not necessarily clash. It's perfectly feasible to construct a plan which protects the value of the money both for the pension holder and their dependents, and to do so tax efficiently and to enjoy good income in retirement. In many cases this is reality, it's no utopia. The key is a good structure. Too many people imbalance their positions via the structure of their post-retirement plan. For example, many pensioners have to decide what structure their pension should be held and managed in. Historically, the majority plumbed for annuities. There's strong anecdotal evidence that suggests this was often done without examination or appreciation of all possible alternatives. It's back to due diligence again. Getting an appraisal of all possible options, the advantages and disadvantages, and comparing and contrasting these. An annuity may be the best option, but it often comes with a destruction of one of the key factors I listed earlier, such as money not being properly preserved for dependents, or the income is stuck at a level and is inflexible. The object of the exercise is to match the requirements of factors against each other, balanced against the individual's own circumstances, risk tolerance, requirements for income and tax position. Getting the perfect balance for such situations is normally achievable. The current pension legislation suggests that for many people, pensions will be seen in the future as more than a retirement income generator for the individual pension investor. Pensions, because of their new tax treatment on death, can be used as a family pot, where the value can be used for the pension investor in their lifetime to support their income needs. But the pot survives beyond this to provide a valuable inheritance for the next generation. We should now look at protecting against care. The first thing to examine in this section is a non-cost factor. Surveys show the main worry people have in respect to future care is not cost. The main worry people tend to have are things like, I don't want to be a burden to my family, or I want to be somewhere nice and comfortable, or even I want to stay in my own home. Therefore, the key element is to examine how long-term care costs can impact on these worries. If you have too much money, you can probably afford the fees. If you have no money, you probably have no choices. The fact is, most people sit somewhere in between these two positions. This is when the costs become a real worry, both in terms of the money itself, but also in relation to the sentiments I just mentioned. An individual aged 80, for example, who suddenly needs care may require £40,000 per year, possibly out of the blue, to pay fees so they are able to afford a comfortable care home and can avoid being a burden on their family. Let's say this 80-year-old is a widow with pensions of £12,000 per year and savings of £40,000, and also a property worth £200,000. They will have limited ways of paying these fees without selling the home. And even if they do, then there is the prospect of the family having a rapidly depreciating inheritance, even if the lady herself does not need all the money in her lifetime. 10 years of care from this point can decimate the financial position of the family. This cost cannot be avoided by the family looking after her, without upsetting her greater concern, not being a burden to the family. She may well want better care than £40,000 per year will buy. It's a desperate conundrum, and one that nationwide is growing ever greater for more and more families. Care can wipe out a generation of wealth in just a few years, and will do so unless some other key drivers are sacrificed or some other way of mitigating the costs can be found. So what ways are there of mitigating and meeting care fees? There are a few ways of paying for long-term care that are not covered by one of the following: from income, from savings, through insurance, or through support from government, either local, central, or both. Firstly, trusts. The use of trust is to help remove assets from an individual's control, which could, in the right circumstances, legitimately take them out of any assessment made by local authority regarding care fees. This is a complex area where rules around deprivation of capital need to be carefully considered. However, for many individuals moving towards retirement or already retired, The value of using trusts is considerable and wider than simply care fee management. Secondly, there's insurance. Insurance is the forgotten root in the modern world. The Dilnot Commission and its report on care in the UK could and should have found more reason to push insurance to the top of the list. It didn't for reasons that were unclear, although it could be because it was considered take-up would be poor. Insurance is often the best answer. However, at the moment, there are limited insurance schemes available. Thirdly, enhanced annuities. There are annuity contracts available within the market which allow individuals to exchange a cash lump sum for a lifetime income. Rates from such contracts can be very high for people with severe health difficulties, which translate into shorter expected lifespans. These can produce exceptionally high levels of guaranteed income, and as their lifetime income plans, they can be ideal for people in care. The fourth way of mitigating and meeting care fees is the use of investment and income structures. For many people, funding care fees can come down to working out how to balance income needs from their pensions and investments. This can often entail converting or rearranging investment portfolios and taking a completely different approach to pre-care investing. The ability to make investments or savings last can vary from approach to approach. From the same pot of money, different approaches and strategies can make years of difference in terms of how long income can be made to stretch and how much income can be derived from the same pot. The concept can be described as decumulation, the means by which investments are cashed and converted into income. This is an especially skilled area of financial planning, and one which is particularly relevant where very high care costs have to be met from a limited reserve or investment fund. And finally, there's NHS continuing care. One of the cornerstones of paying for care could be support from the NHS. This is not means tested, as the support is based on a health assessment. In simple terms, if an individual is deemed to require care due to health problems, then the NHS will provide a level of funding support which can be very significant. This is an area which requires careful appraisal, and if you think this affects you or your family, it is one of those areas where you must take professional advice. The application and assessment process is convoluted and needs to be undertaken carefully, as the assessment will dictate the outcome. There's a part of the legal industry that specialises in helping families recover money from the NHS which should have been paid out but hasn't. Recent legislation changes have restricted this back-testing and recovery element. However, it's evident that many people miss this support. This appears to be for two main reasons. Firstly, individuals requiring care or their families, friends or carers, i.e. those responsible for paying the fees or organising the payments, don't know about the continuing care support and never make an application. Secondly, individuals may go into care with their health position at a point where they do not qualify for support. Sometime later, maybe months, maybe years, their health has worsened and they could then apply. So when they start off in care, they are not eligible for financial support from the NHS, but later on they are. Fresh appraisals are not made. Again, the financial support is not provided, even though it could have been. Now I quickly want to talk about the use of trusts. Trusts are the cornerstone of many financial planning requirements. So why don't more people use trusts? There appears to be many reasons for this, which include: trusts are considered to be only relevant for wealthy people. Trusts are solely there to avoid tax. They're complex and they're expensive. Each of these statements is a misconception. In the main, trusts are simple, with any cosmetic complexity easily dealt with by a specialist. Trusts are as much, if not more, about directing where, when and how monies are paid, rather than avoiding tax. Yes, they can be used for tax efficiency and should be wherever possible, but this is far from their only function. They can be put in place easily and as such, in many cases, are not expensive. Indeed, they often help save money, either through wealth protection, tax reduction, or through other efficiencies. Different types of trusts will have different rules applying to them around who can set one up, when, how long they last, what trustees can do, i.e. their powers, also who the beneficiaries are, what, when and how changes can be made, and how they are wound up. There are also rules on what income can or cannot be paid out and to whom, and also the tax treatment in and around the trusts, and also what happens upon death. All of this is largely irrelevant to you, the listener, because you can adapt the basic principle of wanting to use trusts and leave the finer points to a competent financial planner to sort. The nitty-gritty of how this is done is something they can take care of, just as many people leave their bookkeeping to a bookkeeper. The essence of using trusts is about wrapping assets into a controlled area. In this way, wealth can be protected. Thank you for listening. For more information, visit our website at interfacefinancialplanning.co.uk.